While Muslims disparage Maslamah, calling him the arch-liar and false prophet, his style and substance was indistinguishable from Mohammed's. The foremost American Islamic academician, F.E. Peters, said, "It is difficult to imagine that Maslamah borrowed Ar-Rahman from Mohammed. It is easier to assume that Ar-Rahman had a genuine and long-standing cult in Yemen, a cult which Mohammed may have been drawn." A war was ultimately waged over who was the better prophet. During the War of Compulsion, the Battle of Aqrabab was fought between Muslims and Maslamah's forces. Ar-Rahman's troops won the first encounter, but in the second attack Muslims divided their army to see who could die the most valiantly. 700 of Muhammad's companions died that day, as did much of the Koran. The surahs were stored only in the memories of the warriors. The most faithful were now dead and dying in a grove of old trees that became known as the Garden of Death. While the Koran suffered a serious blow, Allah's army carried the day, slaughtering 7,000 Arabs. With their deaths, all opposition to Islam was suppressed in Arabia. Ar-Rahman was forgotten, and so it would be forevermore. Returning to Mecca during the late 5th century, we discover that the Qusayy tribe had ousted the Jurham clan. As a result, Luhayy came to establish the rights and privileges of the Kaaba. But he became ill, we are told, by Muslim scholar Ibn al-Kalbi in his Book of Idols.
Luhayy went to a hot spring in Syria to be cured. During his stay, he noticed that the locals worshipped idols. "What are these things?" he asked. To which they replied, "We pray to them for rain and for victory over enemies." Luhayy asked the Syrians for some of their stones. They agreed, and he took them back to Mecca, where he erected them around the Kaaba.
Luhayy's fellow tribesmen played along. Everyone got into the mode of worshipping stones, enshrining them, prostrating themselves to them in prayer, and circumambulating them. Ibn al-Kalbi tells us,
The Arabs were accustomed to offering sacrifices before these idols and stones. Nevertheless, they were aware of the excellence and superiority of the Kaaba, to which they went on pilgrimage.
Mohammed, however, did not speak so kindly of Luhayy, the first Arab associated with the Kaaba. He said,
"I saw Luhayy dragging his intestines in hell. I asked him about those who lived between his time and my time, and he said that they had all perished."
Mohammed went on to say,
"This led the Meccans to worship stones. Thus generations passed, and they forgot their primitive faith and adopted another religion, replacing that of Abraham and Ishmael. They prayed to idols and adopted the same errors as the peoples before them. Yet they held fast to the Kaaba and circumambulated it. The greater and lesser pilgrimage, the standing place, and the cry, 'At your service, O Allah, at your service.'"
We have arrived at the crux of the matter. Muslims reading these words will recognize that the rituals just depicted form the very heart of Islam. Yet Mohammed, Islam's founder, conceived none of these religious rites. Every Islamic doctrine and ritual existed before the Koran, Mohammed, or even the first Muslim graced our world. As Ishaq has correctly explained, Islam was practiced in all of its glory before the Islamic prophet was born. And while that's a problem, it gets worse in context. The practitioners were all pagans, and the rites were all directly related to a religious scam, a money-making scheme. That's why, according to Mohammed, they were all damned to drag their intestines through hell. Over these next pages, you're going to discover how Mohammed's great-great-great-grandfather Qusayy capitalized upon the work Luhayy had done when he carried idols and stones back to the Meccan shrine. Qusayy, a pagan, an opportunist, and a very creative, albeit twisted fellow, invented every important Islamic ritual and doctrine to gain power and money. Qusayy invented the religious scam Mohammed dusted off and called Islam. How do I know this? Simple. All we know about Qusayy and the early Meccans comes from the Hadith, and that's what it says. So that begs another question. Why would Islam tell us something so damning to Islam? I believe they had to. The Quran and Hadith make it clear that every Islamic rite was already being practiced by the pagans of Muhammad's day, so they were compelled to provide a reason. The Koran makes no reference to explain the nature of prostration or the Hajj, so the Hadith had to. Moreover, for Mohammed to be a biblical prophet, he had to be connected to Abraham. How is that possible if Muslims don't first connect him to the most important Meccan? And finally, the whole story of Islam is about Mohammed coveting the Kaaba. Unless we know who founded it and nurtured the scheme during its entrepreneurial phase, we'll never understand who is doing what to whom or why. But as with all things Islam, it's a two-edged sword. One side cuts through the fog of ignorance. The other kills the ignorant.
Ishaq. The Quraysh had a well in the Kaaba and an idol called Hubble. They adopted Asaf and Na'ilah by Zam Zam, sacrificing beside them. They were a man and a woman of the Juram tribe, Asaf bin Bagi and Na'ilah bin Dik, who were guilty of sexual relations in the Kaaba, and so Allah transformed them into two stones. Aisha said, "We always heard that Asaf and Na'ilah copulated in the Kaaba, so Allah transformed them into stones."
Ishaq says that Luhayy's Qusays eventually permitted Kanayya's Qurayza to return to the Kaaba. The Quraysh, Muslims would have us believe, are direct descendants of Abraham through Ishmael. F.E. Peters, in his book Mohammed in the Origins of Islam, explains, the tribal eponym Kana'aya stands for 15 generations after Ishmael in the line of direct descent, and Qusayy, the chief actor in what follows, is 8 generations after Kana'aya. Thus, according to Islamic reckoning, Ishmael's descendants returned to their father's town some 7 centuries after he and Abraham built the Kaaba in Mecca. In the meantime, the Ishmaelites, now called the Quraysh, had generally lived dispersed in scattered settlements throughout the neighborhood. Peters is brilliant, and his research is impeccable, but this is nonsense. It's not his fault, mind you, but the Muslim sources themselves. They had no idea who the Quraysh were or from whence they had come, but in a desperate grope for legitimacy, they were ever prone to make believe. Abraham lived around 2000 BCE. 7 centuries would place us in the 14th century BC, not 5th century AD. The Ishmaelites are traced to the Sinai, not Arabia, but this is the least of their problems. Islam's justification for promoting Allah and his Kaaba is all derived from having had it built by Abraham, the great Jewish patriarch, and then having Mohammed been a direct descendant of his son Ishmael. Neither are true. For according to Islam's own traditions, the Kaaba was first ennobled by some stones Luhayy hauled from a Syrian hot spring. The lure of a miracle cure begat a religion.